The saloon stank of spilled whiskey, sweat, and rain-soaked dust. The floorboards moaned beneath the weight of too many boots, and the air inside was loud with laughter that didn't reach anyone's eyes. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains like a warning no one heard. 3 girls stood on a makeshift platform of crates and rotted planks. No one had told them to stand there. But when the man with the gold tooth pointed, they climbed up. Barefoot. Silent. Taught long ago that silence bought them less pain. The eldest, 17, held her chin high, though her lower lip bled from where a ringed hand had struck her earlier. Her hair was wet and tangled down her back, the sleeves of her homespun dress torn at the shoulder. The middle sister, 15, stood slightly behind, one hand gripping the youngest's. That one was only 12. Too small to be in a place like this. Too small to know the full weight of what was about to happen. The crowd, men in long dusters with half-laced boots and slurred tongues, gathered close. Tankards slapped tables. Coins clinked. The saloon's lanterns threw flickering light across the warped wood walls, making the girls look like ghosts in the grain. "She's a bit scrawny," one man said, gesturing at the youngest with a muddy boot. "But I reckon she'll fatten up on stew and chores." "She's a child," the eldest snapped. They got the crowd riled. Laughter roared. The saloon owner, a thick-jowled man with greasy sideburns and a belt made of silver bullets, lifted his hands. "Easy now, boys. Let's not ruin the show." He turned to the girls with mock sweetness. "See, these little darlings were left to me in good faith. Their daddy owed me a month of horses, and then had the misfortune of gambling with his liver instead of his brains. Didn't he die in the street?" someone called. The saloon keeper grinned. "Face first in horse piss. Took my money with him. But lucky me he had collateral." The crowd murmured. Some clapped. A few looked away. The eldest girl's voice shook, but she raised it anyway. "We are not cattle." The saloon owner smirked. "No, sweetheart. Cattle are worth more." The middle sister flinched, pulling the youngest closer. The youngest had said nothing all evening. Her wide eyes flicked from face to face like a deer scenting wolves. A slow hush began to fall over the crowd, not from respect, but from anticipation. The bidding would begin soon. That part always quieted the room. And then came the door. It slammed open with such force the hinges screamed. Rain lashed in behind the figure that stood silhouetted against the storm, tall, broad-shouldered, with a coat soaked dark from the downpour. His hat was low, casting shadow over his face, but the silver at his belt glinted. No one moved. The saloon owner cleared his throat. "Evenin', stranger. You come for whiskey or company?" The figure didn't answer. He stepped forward, boots sloshing as water dripped from his duster. He scanned the room with slow, unreadable eyes, taking in every man, every corner, every gesture that paused midair. Then he looked up at the platform. The girls didn't speak, but the middle one gripped her sister's harder. "You bidding?" the saloon owner asked, chuckling to mask the tension. "Or just here to watch the show?" The man moved to the center of the room. He dropped a small leather pouch on the floor. It hit with a heavy clunk. Silver coins spilled across the warped floorboards. "You'll let them go?" he said. His voice was low, steady. It carried. The owner chuckled. "Friend, I think you're confused about how this works. These girls are spoken for." The man didn't blink. "By who?" "Me," a red-faced settler said, stepping forward. "And 2 of my boys here." The man turned toward him. "Then you'll unspeak it." The room froze. The settler reached for his belt. He wasn't fast enough. The rancher's revolver came out like a whisper, and suddenly the settler's hand was empty, his gun sliding across the floor. The hammer had been cocked but never fired. The threat alone hollowed out the room. "You gonna shoot over a few brats?" another man asked, his hand hovering near his own holster. "I'll shoot over the principle," the rancher said. "And the principle is simple. A man doesn't sell girls. Not on my watch." The saloon keeper laughed, though his voice cracked. "This ain't your watch, stranger." The rancher turned. His eyes, for the first time, met the eldest sister's. "You got names?" he asked. She hesitated. "Not ones you'll buy." "Good," he said. "I'm not buying." Something in his voice, like old gravel worn down by wind and time, settled the tremble in her hands. The room felt smaller. The walls closer. "This here's illegal," the saloon keeper barked. "They're in my care. They're daddy's signatures in that ledger." The man walked slowly to the counter. He looked at the ledger, then reached into his coat. A moment of panic. Then he pulled out a folded letter. "This one's from the circuit judge in Dry Wells. He heard rumors about this place. About what you do here. This says I've got authority to investigate, and to remove anyone being held against their will. The saloon keeper snatched the paper, read it, and swore. You forged this. The rancher shrugged. You could try telling the judge that. Or the marshal if you'd rather wait. The room shifted again. Some of the men began to back away. One tipped his hat to the girls. Another muttered an apology under his breath as he left. The saloon owner's bluster was gone. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Get off that crate, the rancher said, looking to the sisters. The middle one moved first. Then the youngest, who grabbed the eldest's hand. The eldest hesitated. What do you want from us? She asked. The rancher replied without hesitation. Nothing. She narrowed her eyes. Then why? He looked past her for a second at something no one else could see. Because someone should have done it sooner. They stepped down. As they passed the saloon keeper, the eldest girl turned and spat near his boot. The rancher led them out, one hand on the pistol at his hip, the other holding the saloon doors open. Rain poured down like baptism. The youngest girl looked up at him through the curtain of water. What's your name? He didn't answer. Just led them through the mud, past the stables, toward a horse waiting alone with no saddle. The wind picked up. And behind them the saloon sat still. Like something caught in the moment before a storm breaks open. Out there, beyond the town, there was nothing but dust, hills, and silence. But for the first time in a long while, the girls didn't walk into it alone. The horse carried no saddle, just a worn blanket and leather bridle. No bags, no gear, no provisions. Only the man who sat it like a shadow riding west. The three girls followed on foot, quiet as ghosts, the youngest limping slightly from a blister that had split open in her heel. The eldest hadn't spoken since they left the saloon. The rain had stopped, but its weight still hung in the air, heavy and damp as regret. They crested a low hill as dusk bled into a flat, bruised horizon. A hawk wheeled overhead, calling out once before diving into a silent canyon below. The land was wide and waiting. The road they followed barely counted as one, just two ruts through grass and gravel, veering toward nothing visible. Where are we going? The middle sister finally asked. The man didn't turn. Home. Yours? She said. He nodded once. If that's all right. The eldest stepped forward, placing herself between the man and the others. And if it's not? He pulled the horse to a stop, dismounted, faced her. You're free to walk anywhere you like, he said, his tone level. But the next town's 6 days by foot. This one here, he added, motioning gently to the youngest, won't make it halfway without food or shelter. If you stay with me, I'll feed you. I'll protect you. That's all. Her eyes didn't soften. You expect us to believe you're some kind of saint? No, he said. I expect you to believe I'm tired of graves. They didn't ask more after that. The house came into view near midnight. A modest ranch tucked into a slope of dry pine and rock, with a narrow porch sagging beneath its own weight. The windows were dark. No light but the stars. Inside, the air smelled of ash and old bread. A kettle sat on the hearth, long cooled. A single wool blanket had been folded and left on a wooden bench. No woman's touch. No photographs save one. A faded tintype of a man in uniform, a woman beside him, pregnant and laughing, her hand resting on his chest. The girls hovered in the doorway. The man lit a lantern and gestured to a corner near the fire. You can sleep there. The floor's clean. What about you? The middle one asked. He sat down near the door, leaned his back against the wall, and unbuckled his belt gun. I'll be right here. They didn't trust him. Not yet. But something about the way he rested, arms folded, head tilted back like a man who hadn't slept in years, made them believe he wouldn't harm them that night. The eldest girl lay with her eyes open, watching the ceiling. The youngest curled up against her. The middle sister stayed close to the hearth, eyes flicking between the man and the shadows under the door. At some point sleep took them. By morning the man was gone. The lantern still burned low. The door creaked open not long after. He returned with a tin of milk and a loaf of dry bread. Eat, he said simply. They did, cautious but starving. As they ate, he opened the shutters. Light flooded the room, gold and quiet. A field stretched beyond the house, dotted with tufts of stubborn green. A barn slouched to one side, more collapsed than upright. The roof had holes like open mouths. You live here alone? The eldest asked. He nodded. Why? He didn't answer. The day passed without much talk. He worked the broken fence, hammering it back into line. The girls stayed near the house. Waited. Tried not to hope. That evening, the middle sister approached him with a question she'd been holding since the saloon. You really got a paper from the judge? He drove another nail before replying. No. You lied. He looked up at her. Would you rather I hadn't? She said nothing, then turned and walked away. Later, the youngest found a chicken egg in the grass and brought it inside like treasure. The man boiled it for her. She offered him half. He smiled, barely, and shook his head. That night, as the wind whispered through broken window frames, the eldest sat across from him while the others slept. You keep looking at the photo, she said. He didn't deny it. Was that your wife? He nodded. What happened? Pregnancy fever. Took her and the child. The fire cracked. Silence held for a long while. I'm sorry, she said. He didn't look at her. You look like her when you're mad. She stiffened, unsure if it was a compliment or something else. I'm not staying here to fill some memory, she said. I know. She rose to go. But before she reached the pallet, he said quietly, You don't owe me gratitude. You owe me nothing. I don't expect you to trust me. Just to rest a while, until you can stand on your own feet again. She turned back. What's your name? Dane. She nodded once. Mine's not Brat. In case you were wondering. I figured, he said and let her go. Over the next days a rhythm grew between them. Not peace, not yet. But something that looked like it might become peace, given time. The barn creaked less under his repairs. The girls began helping in small ways, clearing sticks, pulling weeds, warming water for washing. The youngest started humming when she swept the porch. The middle sister stitched a torn sleeve from the man's old coat and left it folded on a chair without a word. The eldest wandered the fields alone sometimes. She stood in the wind, her back straight, her hair tied up like a grown woman's, watching the horizon like she expected it to betray her. And on the fifth night, when a coyote howled too close to the house, all three sisters startled awake, but none of them screamed. They looked across the room. Dane was already standing at the door, rifle in hand. He didn't speak. He just waited there until the sound faded and the night settled once more. By morning, there was something different in the way the eldest girl stirred the fire. A weight slightly lifted. Her shoulders sat lower. Her jaw wasn't clenched. She passed him a tin mug of coffee without being asked. He took it, sipped, and finally spoke the words he'd been holding. You got people who'll come after you? The eldest met his eyes. Not people worth fearing. I think they disagree. She shrugged. Let him try. That made him smile, just a flicker but real. The quiet held. The sky deepened to orange. And though neither said it, both understood that this, whatever it was, wouldn't stay safe for long. Not in a land like this. Not with men like the ones left behind in town. But for now the house held warmth. And for now that was enough. It began with small things. A spoon left by the wash basin. A girl's shawl folded and placed on the porch rail before the wind could take it. A bowl of beans set at the head of the table even when no one asked for it. These weren't acts of gratitude. They were acts of adaptation. A shifting of weight. A new rhythm in a house long built for only one heartbeat. Dane noticed the silence first. Not the absence of noise but the absence of waiting. 4 days the girls had walked like deer, ears sharp, eyes wide. Now the middle one hummed while shelling peas on the porch. The youngest had begun talking in her sleep, soft, half-formed things about bread and someone named Ruth. Even the eldest, who still watched Dane like he might grow claws, no longer stiffened when he passed behind her. He didn't mean to care. Didn't plan for it. But something in him began to bend. He'd gone years without company. Years without voices in the house that weren't echoes. His days had been shaped by fence posts and livestock, weather reports he muttered to himself, letters he never sent. He'd forgotten what a shared meal sounded like. What it meant for a house to hold other people's breath. They arrived like stray seeds on wind, and already they were growing roots. One morning, while patching the barn roof, Dane heard laughter. Startled, he paused, hammer in midair. It came again, clear, full, and entirely out of place. He climbed down and found the youngest chasing a chicken around the yard, her arms flapping like wings. The middle sister leaned against the porch rail, laughing so hard she had to hold her sides. He didn't speak. Just watched. Let the sound settle in his chest like rain after a dry season. The eldest stood nearby, arms crossed, face unreadable. She's not a pet, she said. I know. She'll be disappointed when it runs off. She's had worse disappointments. The girl nodded once, then added softly, haven't we all? That night, she found Dane outside near the well, oiling the hinges on the gate. The moon hung heavy and full. A coyote howled in the far distance, too far to matter. My name's Lacey, she said. I figure you ought to know it. Dane glanced at her. All right. The middle one's now. And the little one is Mercy. Fitting, he said. Is it? He didn't answer, just went back to the hinges. But something about the way he stood shifted. Lacey lingered. You never said why you brought us here. He stopped, lowered the oil can and stared into the dark. I don't know. That's not the truth. He sighed. Maybe not. Maybe I just saw something that shouldn't be and I couldn't walk away. That it? No, he admitted. Maybe I was tired of pretending my house was still a home. Lacey said nothing for a long while. Then, barely above a whisper, You think we make it one? He turned and their eyes met. I think you already have. The days continued. Dane began teaching Nell how to set traps for rabbits. She had quick fingers and a quicker mind. Mercy took to following him like a pup, curious, stubborn, asking questions about everything from fence wire to stars. Lacey kept her distance, but not entirely. She began tending the small garden he'd let go wild, pulling weeds with a vengeance, muttering under her breath like she was in conversation with the earth itself. It was Lacey who found the letter. It had slipped from a tin box Dane kept hidden beneath a floorboard in the barn. She wasn't snooping, she was reaching for a spare bucket when the wood gave slightly, and the box slid loose. She didn't open it, just picked up the envelope with the frayed corner and stared at the name written in a woman's hand. To my Dane, if I go before the sun returns. She held it a long time. When Dane found her later, she didn't mention it. But her eyes were different. Less flint, more shadow. That night, she didn't sleep near the hearth like usual. She moved her pallet closer to the door, between Dane and the wind. He noticed. Said nothing. The next morning a horse arrived. A stranger on a dun mare, long coat, mouth too wide when he smiled. He dismounted slowly, letting the dust rise around him. You Dane? He asked. Dane stepped out onto the porch, rifle slung over one shoulder. Depends who's asking. Name's Cutter. I knew their daddy. Played cards with him once or twice in dry wells. Dane didn't move. What do you want? Well, I heard a tale about 3 girls going missing. Heard they ended up here. Figured someone might pay handsomely to get him back. Or hurt you if you don't. Inside, Mercy peeked through the curtain. Lacey stepped behind her, silent as breath. Dane's voice didn't rise. They're not going anywhere. Cutter laughed. Didn't figure you'd be reasonable. He turned his horse slowly. But men are riding this way, mister. They aim to collect what they think is theirs. You best be ready. Then he rode off, slow enough to show he wasn't afraid. Dane watched him disappear down the ridge. Then turned and saw Lacey standing behind him. They'll come, won't they? Yes. She looked at the horizon like it might answer. Then we better be ready. That night, the girls helped drag wood to barricade the windows. Dane checked the rifles, cleaned the pistols, laid out ammunition. Nell asked questions, how to aim, how to reload. Mercy sat on the floor counting bullets. Lacey stood in the doorway looking out into the dark. You didn't want this fight, she said. No, Dane replied. But I won't run from it. She nodded, then turned to him, her face unreadable. You're not the man I thought you were. Disappointed? No, she said. Worried what I'll become if I start believing men like you still exist. He didn't answer. Just reached for the rifle and checked its sights. In the corner, Mercy spoke suddenly. Are we staying? Dane looked at her. At her round face, still bruised faintly from town. At the way she sat straight back now, unafraid to meet his eyes. Yes, he said. Lacey watched him. Then maybe it's time we stop preparing to leave. The dust showed before the men did. It rose in a thin column over the ridge, drifting like smoke from an old wound. Dane spotted it just past dawn while stacking firewood beside the porch. He didn't flinch. Just straightened, squinted into the horizon and quietly said, They're coming. Lacey appeared behind him, hands still damp from washing the morning dishes. She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. Inside, Nell grabbed the rifle Dane had taught her to load. Mercy stood in the middle of the room, unmoving as if she could freeze time with stillness. Her small fists curled at her sides. She didn't cry. By noon they counted 4 riders. One of them wore a red bandana over his face. Another had a sheriff's star pinned crookedly to his vest. At the center rode a broad-shouldered man with a gray beard, scar above his brow, and an unmistakable limp. Their uncle. Lacey saw him and spat in the dirt. Bastard used to beat our mama. Called her excess weight. Dane nodded once, jaw tight. You don't need to talk to him. I plan to do more than talk. The riders halted just beyond the fence line. Dust settled around their boots as they dismounted. They didn't call out right away. just stood there, sizing up the quiet house, the patchy barn, the thin curls of smoke rising from the chimney. Dane stepped forward, rifle across his shoulder, hat low. His voice came out steady. You lost. The man with the limp chuckled. No. But I'd say you're about to be. You've got no claim here. The man took off his hat, revealing a face lined like dried leather. That right? Seems to me these girls belong to kin. I'm their blood. You're filth, Lacey said from behind Dane. And blood means nothing when you let your own starve. He glanced at her, no shame in his eyes. You've always had a mouth too big for your face. Dane stepped between them. You say you're family, yet you sold them off to the highest drunk. You think that still counts as blood? The sheriff-looking man stepped forward, voice oily. We've come for what's owed. Law's on our side. Dane looked at the crooked badge. That badge don't shine like it used to. And it won't save you. The man with the limp nodded once. All right then. We take them or we take your land. Either way this ends today. Dane didn't move. Not today. He turned and walked back toward the porch. The men chuckled, mistaking the calm for retreat. Then they heard the sound of the front door opening. Lacey stepped out, rifle slung across her back, fire in her eyes. Nell followed with her hands stained from gun oil. Mercy walked beside her, holding a slingshot and a stone in each pocket. The sight of the girls standing there, unafraid, stopped the laughter cold. The man with the limp spat. You trained him? You really that lonely? No, Dane said. Just surrounded by women who got more grit than you ever did. The shooting started before anyone meant it to. The sheriff figure twitched first, drawing iron with a curse. Dane's rifle cracked, and the man dropped where he stood, the badge still catching sunlight as his chest hit dirt. The other two dove for cover behind the fence. Bullets splintered the rails. Lacey crouched low, fired twice, missed once. Nell took aim, teeth gritted so tight her jaw pulsed. The man with the limp tried to circle the barn. Mercy, hidden behind the water barrel, saw him. She lifted her slingshot, aimed without trembling, and let the stone fly. It cracked hard against his temple. He stumbled, just long enough for Dane to reach him. The rifle swung like a hammer. Bone cracked. The man hit the ground with a groan, bleeding into dust. Silence returned in pieces. The wind carried smoke away from the yard. The last man crawled backward, arms shaking, face pale as linen. Dane walked toward him. You walk away now, he said, voice like low thunder, and you tell every man between here and the saloon that these girls ain't for sale. They're not yours. They're not anyone's. And if you come back, you won't crawl away next time. The man dropped his pistol, nodded once, and staggered toward the horses. Dane turned to the others. Mercy was shaking but still standing. Nell had a tear trailing down one cheek. Lacey lowered her rifle slowly, her breath ragged but controlled. She looked at him, fierce and flushed. They won't stop. They'll hesitate, he replied. Then what? Then we outlast them. That night no one ate much. But they sat together anyway. Close. As if the danger had bound them tighter instead of tearing them apart. Dane stood on the porch afterward, watching the moon rise clean and full. Lacey joined him, her arms crossed over her chest, hair loose for the first time. You never asked for this, she said. No, he answered. But maybe it's what I needed. She looked out over the quiet fields. They'll come again. Yes. And if they bring more guns? Then I'll stand with you, he said. Just like today. She turned toward him, searching his face for something, weakness maybe or lies. But all she found was steadiness. You're not what I thought, she said. Neither are you. They stood there in silence, watching the wind move through the grass like a whisper. Behind them, the girls slept under a roof, no longer waiting for grief. In that silence, something shifted. Not safety. Not yet. But maybe, finally, something like home. The fire started just before dawn. Dane smelled it first. Smoke, sharp and bitter, cutting through the cold morning like a knife. He was already halfway to the barn when he saw the flames licking skyward, orange against the deep blue of a waking sky. The dry timber caught fast. Within seconds the roof collapsed inward. He turned and shouted toward the house. Nell bolted through the front door, eyes wide, dragging Mercy behind her. Lacey was already halfway to the well, bucket swinging. She didn't scream. She moved with purpose, braid undone, skirts soaked from dew. She had the look of someone who had outrun too many nights to be surprised by one more. Back wall's gone, Dane said, coughing through the smoke. Get the girls behind the house. They did this, Lacey said, voice sharp with fury. They came back. You didn't ask who. You knew. They worked through the blaze, heaving water onto scorched beams, trying to keep the wind from carrying the fire to the house. Dane's arms burned from the effort. Blisters broke open and bled. Smoke clawed at his throat. But he didn't stop. Couldn't. This place was no longer just timber and soil, it had become something else. A thin-boned hope, built quiet and slow. By the time the sun crested the ridge, the barn was a blackened carcass. The animals were safe. The house had held. But everything else, the tools, the seed sacks, the winter stock, was ash. The youngest cried when she saw the old swing gone. Nell stood with her arms folded, jaw clenched, eyes damp. Lacey didn't cry. She stared at the smoking ruin like it owed her something. "We should go after them," she said. "We don't know who it was." "We do." Dane sat on the porch steps, chest heaving. "And if we chase every ghost, we'll never finish anything worth keeping." She turned to him. "And if we don't, they'll burn the rest." He met her stare. She was right. But he'd lived long enough to know that fury spent fast. What came after mattered more. That evening the wind shifted. The air felt clean again. They didn't speak much over dinner. Bread, salt, and dried peaches. Dane chewed slowly, eyes on the fire. He wasn't thinking about the barn anymore. He was thinking about the names that had never been said in this house. The ones that mattered. After the table was cleared, Lacey lingered behind. "Why'd you never ask?" He looked up. "Ask what?" "Our last name. Didn't think it mattered." "Not here." "Well," she said, voice gentler than usual, "it does. To us." He nodded. "And yours is?" "Mathis," she said. "Mama's was Mathis before she married into trouble." Dane let the name sit between them for a long moment. "Mine's Callahan." Lacey exhaled slowly. "It fits." That night, Dane didn't sleep. He sat out on the porch with his rifle across his knees, watching shadows stretch and collapse as the moon climbed. He'd lived through wars and fires, lost a wife and child, survived seasons that took better men. But nothing rattled him like the idea of losing this patch of dirt, this strange family of 3 girls who had once been auctioned like cattle and now moved through his house like it was stitched from their own skin. In the morning they buried what was left of the barn tools. Mercy helped. Nell dug a hole for the old pitchfork like she was laying someone to rest. Lacey stood back, arms crossed, until Dane handed her a stone and nodded toward the grave. She placed it on top. No words. Just that. By noon something had changed in the air. Not safety. Not peace. But a decision. Lacey found Dane working on the fence post, hands blistered and raw. "You could have left us," she said. "Should have." He didn't stop hammering. Didn't want to. "Why?" He set the hammer down and looked at her, really looked. "Because you came here broken and brave. And every day you stay you rebuild something I thought was gone for good." She stepped closer, not breaking his gaze. "You want us to stay?" "I want you to choose." She nodded once. "I already did." The next Sunday a traveling preacher came down the trail. Dusty boots, crooked hat, and a Bible worn down to soft leather. He didn't ask questions, just raised an eyebrow when Dane said, "We'd like to speak some vows." Lacey stood in a borrowed dress, plain and red, her hair braided with twine. She didn't wear flowers. Didn't smile much. But when Dane took her hand, she gripped his like a woman drowning had found something solid. "There's no ring," she said. "I never needed one," he replied. "But you'll carry my name if you want it." "And if I don't?" "Then stay anyway." She blinked slow, the firelight in her eyes. "No," she whispered. "I'll take it." The preacher nodded, said the words, pronounced the bond, not romantic, not rushed, but something steadier. A pact made in ash and stubbornness. Mercy clapped. Nell grinned. The sky turned gold behind them. Dane and Lacey stood side by side on the porch that night, arms brushing. The girls slept inside, door bolted, home warm. "You ever think it'd come to this?" she asked. "No," he said. "But I'm glad it did." And he meant it. Because sometimes the fire doesn't just burn things down. Sometimes, it clears the land for something better to grow. The girl came barefoot through the mud, her hem torn and soaked, trailing like a wounded ribbon behind her. Each step left a small, trembling print in the muck, as if the land itself recoiled from her presence. She was 12, though small for it, with wrists wrapped in twine and lips chapped from wind and silence. Behind her, the man tugging the rope, Carver Dade, staggered from the weight of his whiskey, not the girl. His belt clinked with a flask, and he wore cruelty like it was stitched to his coat. Rain fell soft but steady, dousing the dust, drawing townsfolk to their windows. They watched behind curtains, some clutching their teacups, others whispering to no one in particular. It was not the first child led through town like this. Nor would it be the last so long as hunger bought silence and silence made men rich. The girl did not cry. She did not lift her chin. But something in the set of her eyes, gray like storm water, wide and unblinking, unsettled the watching world. She looked as if she'd already seen the worst of living and found it hollow. Across the street, near the feed store, Eli McRae paused beneath the porch overhang, sack of oats resting against his shoulder. He didn't look at the girl first. He looked at Carver. Then at the rope. Then finally her. And when their eyes met, just briefly, he looked away like he'd touched something too raw. Eli was not a loud man. Folks called him a good one, mostly because he didn't ask for much and stayed out of the way. He'd been a husband once. A father, maybe. That part was whispered too softly to be certain. What was known was this. He ran a modest ranch 2 miles past the chapel and had no livestock that needed a child. So when he crossed the street in the rain and stood between Carver and the girl, heads turned. "Were you talking her?" Eli asked, voice low, like thunder still curled up in a cloud. "Saloon back room," Carver grunted. "Some gamblers need help pouring drinks. And she owes." Eli's eyes slid to the girl's arms. The rope had carved red into the skin. Her shoes were gone. Her dress, no more than thin muslin, hung damp and patched. "How much you say she owes?" Carver raised a brow. $20. Labor debt. Her pa's gone west. Never paid the miner's fee. Eli reached into his coat, pulled out a wad of bills. Rain dampened the corners before he passed them over. "She ain't yours anymore. Now hold on." Eli didn't raise his voice. Didn't move his stance. Just said, "You don't want to finish that sentence, Carver?" That was all. Carver took the money, grumbling as if the cold had bitten him, and turned back down the street toward the saloon. Behind curtains, teacups paused mid-air. A dog barked once, then stopped. Miss Varela Dunn, matron of the boarding house, stood at her porch in her lavender shawl, mouth tight. She didn't wave. But she didn't look away either. Eli turned to the girl. She didn't flinch, though she still wouldn't meet his gaze. Her chin tilted down, not in submission but exhaustion. "You hungry?" he asked. She blinked once. That was all. "I've got bread. Barn's warm." He didn't touch her. Didn't lead her. He simply turned and walked. And she followed. The road to his ranch was wet clay and memory. Every step squelched. But the girl did not lag. She walked like someone who'd been told long ago that stopping meant punishment. They didn't speak. Not when they passed the schoolhouse where bells no longer rang for girls like her. Not when they crossed the wooden bridge that creaked like an old man's knees. Not even when they reached the weather-worn fence that framed Eli's modest home. He opened the barn door first. Lit a lantern. The warm scent of hay, worn leather, and cedar oil drifted out like an invitation. He pointed to a clean patch of straw near the stall. "You can sleep there. I'll bring you supper." Still no words. But her body sagged a little, as if her bones had waited days to collapse. By the time Eli returned with food, a chunk of bread, a boiled egg and a dented tin cup of milk, she was curled like a cat, arms hugging her chest, eyes wide open. He set the tray down gently. "Eat what you want. Leave the rest." She didn't touch it until he'd gone. Inside the house, Eli stared at the cold hearth. He hadn't lit it in weeks. No need when you sleep alone. He did now, though. Something about the rain felt colder than usual. The next morning she was up before him. He found the barn swept, his saddle hung and the water trough full. She stood by the fence watching the sky. Her eyes had no interest in his. "Name?" he asked. She blinked. "Nothing." He tried again. "What should I call you?" She opened her mouth then closed it. As if names were something she'd once owned but traded long ago for safety. So he didn't ask again. At the general store that week, voices rose louder than usual when Eli walked in. "You taking in strays now?" asked Thad from behind the counter, trying for humor but missing the mark. Eli didn't smile. Some strays got more sense than the men who abandoned them. By the time he reached the porch, he heard Miss Varela's voice trailing behind him. "A man alone with a girl like that, it ain't proper." He said nothing. But the wind that carried her words back to him also carried the girl's silence. And that silence had weight. That night, he left a folded blanket beside her. She didn't thank him. Didn't look up. But when he passed by an hour later, the blanket was tucked around her shoulders and her eyes were closed. He watched her chest rise and fall, slow and even, as though, for the first time in a long while, her breath no longer belonged to fear. 3 days passed. Then 4. She still didn't speak. But her hands moved with purpose, feeding hens, wiping down the trough, folding the oilcloth. Each task done as if it mattered. As if she mattered. He noticed she stopped flinching when the door creaked. That she slept with her hands unclenched. That the twitch in her jaw had quieted. One evening, just before dusk, Eli came into the barn carrying a tin of peaches. He found her drawing on the wood beam with a piece of coal, shapes that made no sense to him. Circles, lines, stars. She looked up, startled. But he only said, "Peaches are sweeter than they look." He left the tin and walked out. Later he saw the stars again, on the post near the gate. Just faint marks, fading fast. He didn't erase them. He left his boots by the door that night. Not because they were wet, but because he didn't want to wake her. The next morning she was sitting on the porch, arms folded, waiting. "You gonna ask me again?" she said, voice hoarse and used. Eli blinked. "Ask what?" "My name." He nodded once. Waited. She looked at the sky, then back at him. "Junie." He didn't smile. Just said, "Junie then. You hungry?" And for the first time she nodded. That night, as the town whispered about scandal and shadows, Eli added a second place setting at the table. The chair was too tall. Her feet didn't touch the ground. But she ate slow and steady, chewing like the food might disappear if rushed. He didn't ask about her past. She didn't ask about his wife's photograph sitting face down on the mantel. But before bed, Junie turned to him and asked, "Will I have to leave again?" Eli looked at her, really looked. Not at the dirt on her sleeves or the tightness in her mouth, but at the way she asked, like someone braced for the answer to hurt. "No," he said softly. "Not unless you want to." She nodded once. Her hands didn't tremble. In the barn she lay beneath the wool blanket, eyes wide open again. But this time not from fear. Outside the rain fell in soft threads. And the land, soaked in silence, listened. Eli McRae was not a man of questions, and Junie was not a girl of answers. So the days stretched quiet between them, stitched together by chores, glances, and the unspoken agreement that neither would demand what the other could not give. Mornings came with the lowing of the cow and the pale blue stretch of sky that always looked like it might tear. Eli rose before the sun, the way he always had, moving through his work with the rhythm of habit. When he came out to the barn, Junie was already up, sometimes feeding the hens, sometimes brushing dust off the plow blade with a rag too thin to clean anything. She never asked what needed doing. She simply watched him first and mirrored the motion. There was something solemn about the way she held a broom or turned the handle of the water pump. Not the energy of a child learning a task, but the practiced hush of someone who had long since understood that doing meant surviving. She moved like a ghost who hadn't yet decided if she was welcome among the living. Eli didn't try to make her laugh. He didn't ask why she folded her bread in quarters or why she never took the last sip of milk. He simply made room. A second hook for her coat. A shorter bucket near the well. An extra slice of peach set to the side without comment. It was the kind of care that didn't announce itself. The kind a girl like Junie noticed most. On the fifth morning, she cut her hand on a rusty nail while sweeping the barn floor. The sound she made wasn't a cry, but a sharp intake of breath, the kind that's quickly swallowed so no one hears. Eli turned at the sound and was at her side before she could hide the blood with her skirt. He didn't scold. Just held out his hand, palm open. She stared at it for a moment, then placed her own inside. Her fingers were cold. The cut wasn't deep, but it would scar if left alone. Eli led her to the house in silence, warmed a kettle, and found a strip of clean cloth from an old linen drawer. She watched him work, her gray eyes narrowed, searching his face for something. Disgust, pity, fear. But there was none. He wrapped her hand and tied the knot with a tenderness that made her chest twist in a way she didn't understand. "That'll hold," he murmured. Junie nodded once and pulled her hand away. The blood had started to dry beneath her nails. Still, her grip lingered longer than she meant it to. Later that day, Eli caught her scrubbing the cloth in a bucket beside the barn, her thumb pressed into the fibers like she was punishing it. He didn't interrupt. The town, meanwhile, was learning to gossip again. At the church steps, Miss Varela Dunn lowered her voice but not her suspicion. "It's not proper," she told the preacher's wife. "A girl alone with a man like that? No matter how decent he is, people talk." Thatch Brennan, the blacksmith, overheard but said nothing. He knew the sound of loneliness when he saw it, and he saw it in both their eyes. The town had a short memory for kindness and a long one for scandal. One afternoon, Junie wandered the edge of the property, chasing the wind more than any destination. She found a small wooden box half buried near the tree line. Inside, a faded photograph, Two figures on a porch. A man with a slight smile and a woman with a ribbon in her hair. The same woman whose face sat turned down on the mantel inside Eli's house. Junie didn't ask. That night, she set the photo gently on the barn shelf beside the lantern, upright as if returning something sacred to its altar. Eli saw it the next morning and froze, breath shallow. He didn't move it. That evening, after supper, Junie placed 2 tin cups on the table without being asked. She didn't look at him when she did it. Just poured the milk slowly, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, the bandage peeking out like a story half told. The storm came just after midnight. Thunder low and rolling, rain pelting the rooftop in sheets. Eli lit a lantern and stepped out to check the barn. Inside, Junie was curled in her straw bed, blanket pulled high. But her eyes were open, staring at the rafters. "Storm's passin'," he said, voice calm. She nodded, eyes still fixed on the ceiling. "Don't like the dark when it's loud." He knelt beside her, rested the lantern on the ground. The glow flickered across her face, casting her into something older than 12. Something shaped by more than weather. "You safe here?" he said. "Ain't nobody comin' for you." Junie blinked. "People come anyway. They just don't knock." Eli didn't answer. He stood, placed the lantern beside her, and walked out. But before he closed the door, he looked back once, just long enough to see her hand reach out toward the warmth of the light. By the week's end, the silence between them had changed. It was no longer a wall. It was a bridge, delicate but standing. On the 7th day, Junie left a crust of bread at the barn threshold, crumbled into neat quarters. Eli watched her from the porch. She whispered something to the wind before stepping back inside. He couldn't hear the words, but he felt them. That night, he set a small potted herb on her shelf. It had survived his wife's touch and now hers. The following morning, Junie swept the porch steps. She sang under her breath, off-key, quiet but real. Eli paused with the feed bucket halfway to the coop and listened. Not to the tune but to the fact of it. The sound of a girl remembering something other than fear. And then, as if sensing his attention, she stopped. "I can do the garden too," she said, almost a challenge. He nodded. "Then it's yours." From that day on, the vegetables were weeded, the paths swept. She tied string for the tomatoes with more care than most gave to quilts. Every seed she planted was tucked in like a promise. One afternoon he brought her a pair of boots, scuffed, secondhand but sturdy. She didn't say thank you. But she wore them the next morning, laces tied tight. The town's murmurs grew louder. Children at school asked Miss Varela who the girl was with the boots too big and the eyes too tired. One said she was a thief. Another said she was a witch. Miss Varela silenced them with a look and wrote Junie's name on a blank page in the roll book. "Just in case," she whispered to herself. Back on the ranch, Junie found a length of red ribbon nailed to the fence post. She took it without asking and tied it around the mint pot. That night, Eli found her asleep beside the hearth, not in the barn. Her arms were curled around the wool blanket, her boots resting beside the fire, steam rising faintly from their toes. He didn't wake her. Instead, he stepped outside into the cold and lit his pipe, watching the stars blink open one by one. Somewhere behind him, a girl with bruised hands dreamed without crying. The wind rustled the dry stalks. A barn owl called once into the night. And Eli McCrae, who had once buried his whole heart beneath silence, stood on his porch and felt it beat again. The clouds rolled in low that morning, heavy with the smell of soil and coming rain. The kind of storm that didn't ask permission. Eli stood at the edge of the north field, testing the sky the way a man tests the weight of a memory. He had seen storms like this before, when the ground turned slick in minutes and trees bent like old knees. He motioned to Junie, who was checking the new fence posts, to come in. She nodded once. The way she always did when words weren't needed. But the sky had other plans. Halfway across the pasture, the wind snapped through the grass and dropped its warning. Thunder cracked open the silence, sharp and sudden. Then came the rain. Not a drizzle but a wall, straight and cold and blinding. Junie slipped in the mud, legs folding beneath her. She hit the earth hard. A gasp left her mouth, not from pain but something deeper, something startled loose from the hollow she'd kept it in. Eli was at her side before she could rise. He knelt, his hands hovering just above her arms, waiting. She looked up at him, soaked hair plastered across her cheek, mud streaking her forehead like war paint. And then, for the first time, she spoke. "I didn't cry when Mama left." It came out like a confession dragged from deep water, shaky, defiant, raw. Eli stilled. His hand lowered to her shoulder. Gentle. Present. He didn't rush her. The storm roared around them, but neither flinched. Junie's voice shook, but her eyes stayed steady. She said she'd come back when the sunflowers bloomed. But she never even saw them sprout. Eli didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. He just pulled his coat off and draped it over her shoulders, shielding her from the worst of the rain. They sat like that a while, knee-deep in mud and memory. Later, in the shed, safe from the storm, Junie's eyes followed the water as it dripped from the rafters. One drop, then another. She had a baby, she whispered. My brother. He came too early. I held him. He was quiet. I don't think he blinked even once. Eli leaned against the opposite wall, his coat dripping onto the wood floor. His heart was a tight knot of silence and sorrow. I named him Jack, she said. No one asked me to. But someone had to. She didn't cry, not then. But her hand curled into her lap like it was holding something small, something that had once breathed and now didn't. Eli nodded, not to offer comfort, but to show he'd heard her. All of her. In that old tool shed something shifted. Not loudly. Not all at once. But like frost giving way to thaw. They didn't speak the rest of the afternoon. But the silence was no longer an absence. It was a shelter. That evening Junie set the table. 2 plates. 2 forks. She folded the napkins square and centered. When Eli sat down, she passed him the bread basket before he could reach for it. I don't like it when folks yell, she said suddenly, as if picking up a thread from hours ago. It don't matter what they say. Just the noise of it. Eli stirred his stew. I don't like it neither. A small smile pulled at the corner of her mouth, like it hadn't been used in years. He noticed but said nothing. As days passed she spoke more. Not stories, not yet. But bits. Questions. Observations. Why don't you put the mirror up in the front room? Was that your wife's shawl in the chest? Do chickens ever miss their eggs? Eli answered some. Let others sit. The rhythm of their life changed in small ways. Junie began humming again, only in the garden when she thought no one was listening. Eli started setting out an extra biscuit at breakfast, even on days she rose late. She asked for a second blanket when the nights turned colder, and he brought her 3. In town, eyes followed them closer now. At the dry goods store, Carver Dade watched from the porch, a slow smile spreading like rot. Rancher's got himself a housemaid, he muttered. Eli heard. He paused, hand tight around the sack of flour, but said nothing. Just met the man's eyes and held them, long enough to make Dade look away. Junie noticed. Her spine straightened. Not in pride but in protection. She had learned early that most men don't defend what isn't theirs. And she was learning that Eli did without needing to own a thing. One afternoon she found a stack of books in a trunk in the attic. Dusty spines, pages yellowed at the edges. She carried them down like treasure. Can I? She asked, laying them across the kitchen table. Eli looked up from the ledger. They were hers. I'll be careful. I know. She started reading by lantern light. First slow, tracing the words with her finger. Then faster. One night Eli passed the doorway and heard her reading aloud, to no one. Just for the sound of it. Just to believe her voice could fill a room and not be punished. He didn't interrupt. That week the preacher visited. Said the church board had concerns about appearances. A man alone with a girl, no legal bond, it makes tongues wag. Eli stared at the man for a long moment, then said, Tongues wag whether you feed the poor or ignore 'em. Makes no difference to me. The preacher left, his boots heavier than when he came. Junie didn't ask about it. But that night, when she placed the firewood beside the hearth, she added an extra log. That was the night of the fever. Junie woke coughing, skin flushed, breath tight in her chest. Eli heard the sound before the rooster called and came running. She was burning. He soaked cloths, brought cool water, stayed by her side through every fit. Once, delirious, she cried out for Mama. It made Eli flinch. But he didn't leave. He sat beside her for 2 nights straight. Feeding broth by the spoonful, whispering steady reassurances. Her hand gripped his shirt once, knuckles white. He covered it with his own, grounding her. By the 3rd morning the fever broke. She woke with a cracked voice and asked, You stayed? He nodded, too tired for words. She blinked slowly. Thank you. Eli looked down at her small hand, the bandage long gone, now wrapped in quilt. Your family, Junie, he said. She looked at him a long time as if testing the truth of it. Then whispered, No one ever said that to me. They didn't speak for the rest of the day. But that evening Junie walked out to the barn, picked up the broken plow handle and sanded it smooth. Later, when Eli passed the porch, he saw something new carved into the rail. Not initials. Not flowers. Just one word, Jack. It wasn't about the dead baby brother. It was about memory. About claiming something she wasn't supposed to keep. Eli sat beside her. Said nothing. And she leaned her head on his shoulder like it had always been there. The first trouble came not with fists or flames, but with a knock on the door, a knock too loud for kindness. Junie was sweeping the porch when she heard it. Eli stood by the woodpile, stacking ash logs. He straightened, slowly, his back stiffening before his hands did. The knock came again, insistent, official. When he opened the door, Carver Dade stood there with two deputies, their stars crooked on their chests like they'd been pinned in anger. "We got papers," Carver said, waving a folded sheet like a flag of war. "That girl's been reported missing. Orphan property of the state, indentured out by contract. Sheriff says she needs returning." Eli didn't blink. "She ain't property. And she ain't leaving. Junie had come to stand behind him, silent, barefoot in the doorway. One deputy cleared his throat. "This your daughter, then?" Eli didn't hesitate. "She's mine." "That's so." Carver leaned in, his mouth sour with whiskey. "Funny how she didn't say that when I found her knee-deep in debt, working her keep." "She was 12, Eli said, quiet as thunder rolling in the hills. "No child owes that kind of debt." The man smirked. "Then prove she's yours." "Papers? What?" "Witness." Junie stepped forward, small but steady. Her voice didn't tremble. "He fed me when I hadn't eaten. Fixed my hand when no one cared. Sat beside me 3 nights through fever. I don't know what makes a father, but that's close enough." The porch had drawn a crowd. Word traveled fast when scandal knocked. Miss Varela stood in the street, arms crossed tight. Thatch Brennan emerged from his smithy, black dust still on his face. A murmur rolled through the townsfolk like wind through brittle leaves. Carver laughed, sharp and thin. "You all gonna let a man claim a girl like a lost calf?" It was Miss Varela who answered. "We're gonna let a man defend a child he didn't make, because he's the only one who ever did." The preacher arrived out of breath. "There's no law says love needs a paper." Carver's grin twitched. "Don't need a law to know what ain't right." "You mean what ain't convenient," Eli said, taking one step down. "This girl's seen more decency in 6 weeks than most see in 6 years. You want to take her, you'll do it in front of all these folks. You'll take her from my hands." He held them out, open, empty, unshaking. Carver didn't move. The silence between them was tight as a drawn rope. Then, wordless, Carver shoved the paper into his vest and spat into the dust. "Won't forget this," he muttered. Eli nodded. "Neither will I." They left with their boots heavy and the eyes of the town burning holes in their backs. But that night, vengeance came with smoke. Junie woke first. The barn was full of it, black and bitter, curling through the rafters like a curse. She screamed Eli's name before her feet hit the ground. Eli burst out the house with a bucket, eyes wide with fear sharper than flame. Together they fought, him dousing hay, her dragging the frightened mule free. Embers landed on her sleeves, searing holes through fabric and skin. She didn't stop. Neighbors came running. Miss Varela with wet quilts. Thatch with barrels. Hands, buckets, boots stamping fire. When the last ember hissed into mud, the barn still stood, but barely. Junie collapsed beside the trough, coughing, streaked in soot. Eli knelt beside her, cupping her blistered hands. "You should have stayed inside. You shouldn't have been alone." He didn't argue. They sat on the ground, steam rising around them in the cold. Somewhere above, the sky was clear again, like it hadn't just watched them burn. By morning, the damage was sharp and sobering. The roof would need replacing. The stall doors had scorched black. But Junie's drawing, the one etched in charcoal on the inside beam, the sunrise with no door, was still there, faint but untouched. Eli touched it gently, then turned to Junie. "Let's build it again. Better." She nodded, jaw set. "With a door this time." That evening the preacher rang the schoolhouse bell. Not for class. Not for sermon. But to call the town. People gathered, lanterns in hand. And on the steps of the chapel, Miss Varela read from a page not written by law but by memory. "This girl, Junie, was bought, bruised, and left in the rain. We let that happen. But she stayed. She worked. She gave more kindness than she got. So I'm telling this town plain, if anyone lays a hand on her again, they lay it on me." Thatch stepped forward, voice thick. "She's one of us now." From the crowd, a boy raised his hand and said, "She helped me with my stutter." Another girl whispered, "She gave me her bread at school." And slowly the townsfolk clapped, not loud or wild but steady, like they were trying to fix something, like maybe they had just remembered how. The preacher turned and looked up at the bell tower. Then he said, "We won't ring it again for child labor. Not in this town." The bell stayed silent from that day forward. That night, back at the ranch, Eli carved a new sign for the gate. Juniper Ranch. He didn't tell her why. But when Junie passed it the next morning, she touched the edge of the wood with one finger and smiled. Not big. Just enough. Winter rolled in soft as ash, settling over the town with a hush that made even the saloon piano play slower. Snow gathered along rooftops, coating the world in a kind of mercy, and at the edge of town Juniper Ranch stood like a story half told. Junie woke earlier now. She moved through the house with quiet certainty, feeding hens, checking fences, folding linens beside the hearth. Her sleeves were no longer torn. Her hands bore faint scars, but they were steady, sure. She no longer paused before entering a room. No longer looked to Eli for permission, only direction. She was 13 now, and though she still slept in the barn some nights by choice, she had begun leaving the lantern lit, not out of fear but as if to say, "I'm still here." Eli watched her from the porch most mornings, steam rising from his tin mug, the sunrise brushing her figure in gold. He said little as always, but his gaze lingered longer than before. A man could live a lifetime without knowing peace and still recognize it when it arrived in boots 2 sizes too big and a braid that never stayed tied. One morning he handed her a small box, hand-carved from cedar. Inside a bell. Wooden. Hollow. "It don't ring," he said. "Didn't want it to. Just figured, if a thing's meant to call someone it ought to ask, not command." Junie turned it in her hands, then placed it above the door on a hook she'd hammered herself. "Doesn't need to ring," she said softly. "I hear it anyway." The ranch grew that winter, not in acres but in heart. Miss Varela sent old blankets. Thatch Brennan brought nails and new wood. The preacher offered books for Junie's shelf. They didn't call it charity. They called it neighboring. And Junie accepted it, not with shame, but with the quiet dignity of someone who'd learned the difference between kindness and pity. Eli's hands had begun to stiffen with the cold, but he never let her lift the heaviest loads. She argued sometimes, in that gentle way she was learning. "I can carry that," she'd say, arms crossed, chin raised. "I know," he'd answer, handing it over anyway. Then came the letter. No return name, just the stamp of the state. Eli read it once, then burned it in the stove. Junie watched the flame eat it, piece by piece. "Was it about me?" she asked. He nodded. "Do I need to leave?" He looked up sharply, eyes fierce. "You're not going anywhere." She believed him. And yet, for the next week, she moved a little slower, laughed a little less, as if the shadow of that paper still lingered in the walls. Eli noticed. He didn't ask. But he left a new pair of gloves on the porch rail, just her size. When she found them, she sat down on the step and cried, not from fear but from the way something so small could say, "Stay." One snow-choked evening, a wagon arrived at the gate, wheels crunching like bones beneath the frost. A stranger stepped down, a girl no older than Junie had been when she arrived, barefoot, shivering, hair matted with sleet. No name. No bag. Just a look in her eyes that Junie recognized instantly. Eli stepped forward. "You lost, miss?" The girl didn't answer. Her mouth opened, then closed. Junie moved beside Eli and took his hand without asking. "She's not lost," Junie said, her voice even. "She's just not been found yet." They took the girl in. The townsfolk didn't question it this time. They brought firewood and soup, socks and ribbons. The bell at the schoolhouse stayed quiet, and no one asked who the girl belonged to. Belonging, it seemed, had changed its shape. On Junie's 14th birthday, Eli made her a bookcase. He carved her name into the top with careful hands. She filled it in hours. Not just with books, but with feathers, folded notes, a tin button from the girl's coat. The girl, now called Lark, slept curled beside the hearth like Junie once had. "You're her Eli now," he told her once, watching them draw side by side. Junie smiled. "You still are." The snow melted slow that spring. Wildflowers pushed through stubborn soil, as if unsure the world was ready for color again. At the edge of town, Juniper Ranch bloomed with new life, more than could be measured in stock or soil. Children came. Women without kin. Men with nothing but hope and calloused hands. The ranch didn't turn them away. No one spoke of Carver Date anymore. His name faded like smoke, like old shame. Junie stood taller now. When she walked through town, heads nodded. Doors opened. She was no longer the girl bought in mud. She was the one who stayed, and in staying changed everything. One afternoon, while repairing the gate, she looked over her shoulder and said, "Do you think I'll ever stop remembering what it was like before?" Eli leaned on the post beside her, wiping his brow. "No," he said. But I reckon remembering is how you keep from becoming the ones who forgot. She nodded. Good. I don't want to forget. I want to be the reason someone else gets remembered. And she was. Long after that winter. Long after the snow returned and melted again. After Eli's hands grew too tired to work and Junie's voice grew strong enough to carry across rooms. She never rang the bell. She didn't have to. Because everyone who stepped through that gate already knew. This was a place where no child was forgotten, no name erased, no scar left unacknowledged. And those who stayed didn't just find shelter. They found home. And you, if you're listening now, maybe you're standing in the doorway of something broken. Maybe you've been dragged in the mud or made to believe you were less. But I promise you someone's waiting. Someone with calloused hands and a coat for your shoulders. You don't need to earn it. You only need to arrive. Because sometimes the bell doesn't ring. It doesn't have to. Sometimes love just opens the door.